Welcome to my 201st video on my work with OO gauge. This is going to be a long and complicated one, and not a very happy one, because it's a long, complicated and not very happy story. Hopefully parts of it will be of interest for various reasons. The subject will be my attempts to get a Trix twin model of a BR Standard Class 5 loco that I bought running on my Dublo 3-rail tabletop. If you've watched my previous videos, this may sound familiar to you, as I already featured this model in part 185, mostly failures and frustration. After my initial failures to persuade this model to work 3-rail, as shown in that video, I didn't give up, and I've put lots more time into it with varied success. I certainly did make some progress at times, but ultimately, after fighting one problem after another, I pretty much settled for a draw. The thing does run up to a point, but is left with problems that I don't really have any hope of fully fixing. Perhaps I should give up on trying to persuade things other than original Dublo models to run on my Dublo tracks, since my results so far have been less than stellar. But I haven't entirely given up even so, and I do have other possibilities in mind. This was where I left the Trix Class 5 at the end of the previous video where I showed it. Centre rail pickup cobbled together from its own original pickup mounting bar together with Hornby Dublo shoes. This didn't work. The shoes couldn't pivot properly and I couldn't spring them properly. My next move was to see if I could use some parts from various Trix locos that I'd picked up. I actually ended up with quite a few of these, mostly the older type intended to run with AC. Their wheels, with massive flanges and attached gears, made them quite unsuitable for running on Hornby track. Here I've removed the centre pickup mounting bar, and you can see the pivoted shoes and the spring that pushes those shoes down. Unfortunately, the spring is riveted to the chassis, which makes reusing the arrangement difficult. The bar and the shoes looked promising, though there was the issue that this bar was designed to be attached by a single screw, whereas the bar on the Class 5 was attached with 2 screws. I drilled holes in that bar and attached it to the Class 5 using the Class 5's original screws. It looked sort of okay, but it didn't really work as the shoes wouldn't pivot properly. Here's the bottom of the Class 5 chassis with no pickup bar attached. This is another Trix AC loco. Again, the pickup bar is attached with a single screw. And again, the spring for pushing the shoes down is riveted to the chassis. I tried to drill out the rivets to detach the spring, but I made a mess of the spring, although even if I hadn't, I'm not sure I could have usefully mounted the whole spring to the Class 5. I mounted this new bar to the Class 5 using just one screw, so no drilling, and I used the separated ends of the original spring, cut off, reversed, and pushed under the shoes at each end. This actually worked, sort of, although there were some problems with pickup continuity. Okay, I finally got this Trix twin BR Class 5 sort of running on my Hornby Dublo 3-rail track. That's it at the back. In front of it, that's the 8F in front of it. That's the Trix twin behind. Had a lot of struggle with this. It should have run on this track when it was originally sold, because it was a Trix twin loco and it had fine scale wheels, and it was a 3-rail loco originally. But when I got it, it had been converted to 2-rail, so it had no centre rail pickups, and I had a heck of a time getting centre rail pickups to work on it. I had to try about 12 different times with different combinations of Trix and Hornby parts and improvised bits, trying to get 3rd rail pickups that would actually work, pick up consistently, not make the wheels spin, not jam on points, etc. I think I'm finally there with the 3rd rail pickup, so it does sort of run now, but with a few problems. So let's turn up the power. Okay, well that's the first problem. it stops on the level crossing. Just back it away a minute. Why does it stop on the level crossing? It stops on the level crossing because the level crossing track has these pieces beside the center rail, and they are cut away a little bit by the center rail, and the Hornby pickups can manage to contact the center rail between them because they're more curved, but the Trix pickups that I'm using are not particularly curved. Indeed, they're old ones and they're worn, and they've probably even got a bit of a groove in the middle of them, so they lose contact on that piece. Now, I can probably get it over the level crossing by cranking the power up. Yeah, if I crank the power up to 50%, I'm going to slow it down again as we go back there, but if I crank the power to 50%, I can get, and that's 35%. Alright. See, if I just give it a burst, that's 35. I'm running it at 35% power, but I'm shoving the power up to 50% as I come to the level crossing to bridge the, to manage to jump the center rail pickups across. Otherwise, it's running quite nicely, eh? Level crossing coming up. Yeah, just about got over there. Okay. So otherwise it looks as if it's running pretty well. So that's one problem. It can't get over the level crossing without a boost in power. But otherwise it seems to be running pretty well. But unfortunately there is another problem. If I change the points so that we go round the inner section at the back rather than the outer section, we will see what the other problem is. Wish there wasn't another problem, but there is. Where are we? Sorry. Let me zoom out a little bit. Okay, bursted power to get over the level crossing, not quite enough. I only put it up to 40. I needed to put it up to... Whoops. I don't know. Okay, I'm just trying to back it off the level crossing a bit. So, okay, so now we're going to take another, we're going to go 50% power over the level crossing. Okay, here we go. But now see, it's stopped on the point there. It's stopped on the point there. But notice how it's stopped. The engine is past the point, the tender is on the point. Now I get it going again, and it stops at the next point. And it stops at the next point. I don't have enough hands here. So I want to get it off the point, but I also want to be able to use the controller because I want to stop it at some point. Oh, let's try once more. See, I can't, even by boosting the power, I can't get it over those points, is the problem. I cannot get it over these points. It'll go over them as you saw. It'll go over them straight. It'll go over them straight, but oops, won't do anything useful if I derail it. And now it's going to stop on the level crossing because I'm not putting enough power on, but that's okay anyway. So I'll turn the power off now. I think the main reason it stops on the points, I mean, I'm not 100% sure entirely, but I think the main reason is because of the tender. The problem is, this was designed to pick up by center rail pickups on the loco, which I've now replaced, and then it was designed to pick up from one side of the outer rails through two tender wheels. Not much of a pickup, just two tender wheels on one side. The reason they do one side, of course, is because Trix twin railways work that way. All Trix twin locos worked between
they worked with a circuit between the centre rail and one side, not both sides. So that's why it's Trix twin railways, because you could run two locos, one running off one side rail and one running off the other side rail. So yes, I know as a Trix twin loco it's only going to contact one side, but the problem is it also doesn't pick anything up from the loco from the side rails. It only picks up from one side on the tender. And that's just not enough to get it over points, etc. Well, it's enough for it to go straight through the points, but it doesn't seem to be able to cope with turning through the points. So it's going to have to go back to the bench for more work, I guess. And I might fiddle a bit with the level crossing to help it get over the level crossing. We'll have to see, but it's definitely, I've got to see if I can do something in terms of actually trying to add more pickup, basically, because that's the only way I'm going to get this engine to go over the points turning. Well, all I've done, I haven't added any extra pickups yet. All I've done is clean the wheels and the pickups on the tender. And, you know, it sort of gets over things sometimes, but more, well, quite often doesn't. I mean, it's running about 50... it seems to be getting worse. I had it running a little better than this before, but... the problem is... Whoops, oh, I derailed it there trying to push it. Whoa. Something's not right there at all. Well, by cleaning the wheels and the pickups on the tender, I've just about got it to go around in jerk motion at 55. It nearly stops every time it gets to a point, but at 55 it can just about make its way over. But that's the best I can do. If I'm going to get it to do any better than this, I'm afraid I'm going to have to add another pickup, and it's not easy to do because virtually every part of the tender, of the loco, I beg your pardon, virtually every part of the loco is actually connected to the centre rail pickup. It's all live, so trying to put a pickup on it without shorting things out is going to be a devil of a job. But what can you do? I gotta think about it. I gotta think about it.
So my next thought was, how do I improve pickup from the outer rails? I thought that if I could get it to pick up from both sides of the tender, that might fix the issue. Here is the tender, and you can see there are only two metal wheels with pickups on the near side, and that's where all of the outer rail pickup for the model comes from. Here I've unscrewed the tender base plate, and you can see the pickup parts. And here I've removed the axles and wheels, just two metal wheels on the front and back axles. And here's the part for the pickup, which I'm cleaning with electrical contact cleaner. I thought that if I could replace the Trix axles and wheels with some non-insulated Dublo axles and wheels, that would result in pickup from both outer rails, which should improve things. Here I'm cleaning up some Dublo wheels that I removed from tank wagons a while ago with the intention of trying this idea. Unfortunately, it turned out that the recesses in the tender for the Trix axles were much smaller than the Dublo axles. I couldn't really see how to fix this, so I gave up on this idea. I unscrewed the body retaining screw in the chimney in order to allow me to remove the body, as I thought that adding side rail pickup to the loco would be the only other solution, and I wanted to see the chassis and its wiring. The body was attached to the chassis by that screw in the chimney, and also by the screw that attached the tender drawbar. With those two screws removed, the chassis could be taken out of the body. The green wire comes from the tender, carrying the pickup from the outer rail, and goes to one brush. For some reason it appears that there are resistors in sequence with the connection to both brushes, the red components seen there. I considered how I might fit an outer rail pickup to the loco. I needed to avoid interfering with the centre rail pickup, and I would need to isolate from the chassis as the centre rail pickup connected directly to the chassis. I figured that if I attached one of the pickups that came with this model in its two-rail conversion to the back of the chassis, that could work. Here's what that pickup looked like. The model came with two of these, picking up from two wheels on one side. I bought some epoxy for use attaching this new pickup, as I really didn't trust superglue to do this. Here are the instructions for this epoxy, definitely trickier to use than CA, but hopefully it will provide a better permanent join. I cleaned up with electrical contact cleaner first, in hopes this would thoroughly degrease things so that the epoxy would attach. I cut a piece of thick card to serve as an insulator between the new pickup and the chassis. I mixed up some of the epoxy ready to use it for this attachment. I used that epoxy to attach my piece of card to the back of the chassis. Whilst that epoxy was curing, I cut a piece of wire for the connection of the new pickup and stripped and tinned its ends. I soldered one end of my piece of wire to the pickup part. Then I epoxied the pickup onto the piece of card. All of this was done carefully so as not to foul the wheels, which were close on both sides, and of course to line the pickup up so it picked up from the tyre of the wheel. I tested the continuity to make sure that there was connection between the wheel and the other end of my pickup wire, which there was. Now I needed to connect my pickup wire in with the wire from the tender going to the brush. I threaded my wire round the back of the body and through the same hole in the firewall as the wire from the tender. I did consider running my wire up round the side of the chassis, but it seemed that might jam the fit of the body or foul the wheels. There was an insulating sleeve covering the connection between the wire from the tender and the resistor connected to the brush. I needed to get in there somehow to connect my wire. I unsoldered the end of the resistor from the brush connector. Then I straightened the resistor and pulled back the insulating sleeve, revealing the connection to the wire from the tender. I soldered my wire from the new pickup in with the wire from the tender connected to the resistor. The clip was just there to hold the wires together whilst I soldered them. Then I slid the insulating sleeve back over the connection and threaded it back under the resistor for the other brush, which was where it had been before, and soldered the resistor back to the brush connector, completing the connection. I had rather a lot of extra wire, and in hindsight green wasn't a very sensible colour to use. I reattached the body with the screw through the chimney and the tender drawbar screw. I tested with my bench power supply. It was possible to power the motor via connection to the centre rail pickup and either one of the metal tender wheels or the loco wheel with a new pickup. I got the model back onto my 3-rail tracks for testing. It was rather a pity that the wire showed up so much, but things did seem to work, basically.
So, now let's see this Trix Standard Class 5 on the Dublo tracks again after my latest modifications. Okay, so the good news is it does actually work. Adding that extra pickup to the loco does now make it go over the point smoothly. So the diagnosis of the problem, that it was caused by poor pickup from the outside rails, since it was only picking up from those 2 tender rails before, was correct. So that's the good news. The bad news is that that wire I used wasn't very good. I don't know, I used a green wire because they used a green wire, which didn't make any sense really, because we don't want the wire to be visible. And you can see this whopping great green wire sticking out the side of the model now. That's one thing that's not good. The other thing that's not good is I suspect that with the model running round all the time and flexing that wire, it's going to break off from the pickup eventually, because we're apt to be flexing it where it's soldered onto the pickup. So yes. So the good news is it works. So I was right about what the problem was. The bad news is I don't know. A, it looks a bit ugly because of the wire sticking out, and B, I don't know whether it will last. Let's just try it backwards. We may have some derailing problems going backwards, but we'll try. We're running at about 30% power, so I'm certainly not using an excess of power. But you can see that whopping great green wire sticking out. I mean, I can paint the wire black, I suppose. I tried tucking it in, but it keeps coming out. This is the problem. The wire, I thought that was pretty thin wire, but it's still a bit stiffer than their wire. And it's hard to get it to stay tucked in. You tuck it in and it comes back out again. So, well, this is certainly by far the best I've had this Trix Loco running. I mean, it's running pretty well now without any real hesitation over the point. So that's good. But there's a bit of a problem with the wire sticking out and being very visible. Also, of course, it's still marked as British Railways, which I don't really want, but I didn't want to muck around spending time remarking it unless I could get it going.
So that was about the best I ever got things working, and I decided that I would go ahead with remarking the model as an LMS engine. I did try to paint the wire black to make it less conspicuous. I used methyl hydrate on cotton buds to remove the British Railways markings. They came off fairly readily, although some rubbing was required to fully remove the gold, which often seems to be the most obstinate colour. Once the markings were removed, I washed with water. This gave a fairly clean removal on both sides. I had some Pressfix HMRS yellow LMS marking decals that I thought would be appropriate. Unfortunately, there were no digits in the Pressfix set that matched the existing digits on the model, so I had to completely remove the original numbers, which I did on both sides of the cab. I put Pressfix LMS letters onto the side of the tender. And here are those with the backing removed, which is just done by wetting it with water and sliding it off. And here's the other side of the tender marked the same way. I put new numbers onto the sides of the cab. I chose a number with no repeated digits, as the Pressfix set only provided 4 of each digit in each size. Here's the other side of the model with its new markings. And here is the model back on the tracks with its new markings. This was pretty much the high point of the whole process, as things started to go wrong again from here.
Okay, so now I have, as best as I could, remark this as LMS. I mean, true, it's not really an LMS engine, it's actually modelled to be a BR standard class Black 5, which has a higher running board and things, but still, as best as we can. We do what we can, so now let's see if we can run it. I'm going to give it maybe 35% or so, slightly below 35%. Well, you know, I've been working on this thing for weeks, if not months now. I made numerous attempts with the third rail pickup. This has got a Trix third rail pickup on that with sort of modified springs because I couldn't transfer the springs directly they were on the original of a Trix Loco. This is a Trix Loco, but it came to me 2 rail, of course. Well, it's running, famous last words, but it's running pretty smoothly now because of with that extra pickup, you know. Oh, talk about famous last words. You say something and it always goes wrong, doesn't it? That's why I know I say that far too often, famous last words, but something my mother used to say, you know. Whenever you say something's working well, it always stops working, basically. What can I tell you? See, it's hesitating over that point. Now let's try and clean that point. See if that helps. Oh no, it made it worse. I'm trying, because I don't know which bit of that point it is that's not working. One. Oh, for goodness sake! Oh, and now the thing's derailed down the other end, I think. Oh dear. If it's not one thing, it's another. Well, now I thought I was finished and I've remarked it. It started acting up over the points again a bit, but I don't think I can do much more with it. That point especially, it really doesn't seem to like, and I think it's the third rail pickup that's causing the problem now, not the outer pickup, and there's really not much I can do with the third rail pickup to make it any better. So it's sort of almost a running loco now, but it's still a bit temperamental going over points. What can you do? That's about the best I can do. Oh, see, it stopped then because I didn't go fast enough. And it's the... yeah, it's the third rail. It's the third rail pickup is not quite managing to get to stay in connection over that point. If I give him a burst of power going into it, I can get him over, but... yeah, whatever. Well, honestly, I think I've about had it at this point. That's all the effort I've got to make with this thing. It's sort of more or less working. Still a little bit of an issue over that point, but... certainly working better than it was before.
So I realised at this point that the motion had come apart on one side of the model, a fairly serious problem. I thought at first that the crank pin had come out, as sometimes happened, and that isn't too serious a problem so long as you can find the crank pin, but the crank pin itself was still in place. The problem was much worse. The fitting into which the crank pin screwed had sheared right off the wheel. Actually, it looked as though it might have broken off in the past and been reattached with glue. Here is the little part into which the crank pin screwed. I think originally this was formed as part of the wheel itself. I struggled to fix this problem. First, I tried reattaching the fitting with CA glue, and I screwed the crank pin back into the fitting. But that didn't work. When I ran the motor, the crank pin fitting just broke off again. I tried again with epoxy, curing it overnight, but the result was just the same. It broke off when I ran the motor. I wondered if I might be able to fit a new wheel, but these wheels were nothing like those on the old Trix AC engines that I had, and I couldn't see much hope of being able to procure a suitable replacement wheel. So the only other approach that I could think of was to give up on the original crank pin and fitting and just to try to screw directly into the wheel itself. I selected a suitable screw from this set. I went with M1.4x8, that is a 1.4mm diameter, 8mm in length. I cleaned a hole in the wheel and fitted the screw right through the various motion parts and into the wheel. I didn't need to use a washer at the end of the screw, as the hole in the outer part was only just big enough for the screw to pass through. This sort of worked, although there was supposed to be a spacer between the driving rod and the conrod, as seen at top here. That's the side where things didn't break, and I didn't have that spacer. Also, I rather feared that my screw would just work its way loose over time. I did try the loco back on the tracks again.
Well, at this point, I think I have to, pretty much give up on this. It very vaguely goes, but the valve gear there that broke is held together by that very iffy screw, which will probably just fall out after a while. And in any case, it's missing its spacer, so it may jam, and the thing doesn't work very well. But I mean, I don't think I'm going to get any better. Oh, see, it keeps stopping on this point. That was where I was at before. I was trying to fix that problem. The problem of consistently stopping on that point when the valve gear fell apart. Oh, I don't know. Oh, I don't know. It's not going to go, is it? So I've spent vast amounts of time mucking around with this thing, and it basically is largely a dead loss. What can I tell you? There's not much else I can do. I've tried, but I think that's, all I can do with it at this point. It very vaguely goes a bit. I don't think it's a good idea to try and make it go much more than that, because something will fall apart again if I do, probably. Oh well, I tried. Not a great success, this one.
So I ran the model round and backed it into the engine shed, and there mostly it will have to stay, I'm afraid, as I don't really see any prospect for improving it further. I can only hope that I have better success with other loco endeavours that I'm intending to try.